Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him.
Hello and welcome to Retro 48K. Man, that intro brings back memories. It's just such a classic series for me. This is Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remastered. It's out on all major consoles and PC at the minute, and it's very similar to the recent Tomb Raider remasters in that it's a very faithful remaster of the original games, where they've kept a lot of the styling of the originals and just updated the graphics. So that brings the question, does Soul Reaver still play as well today, and is it still worth you picking up? So let's have a deep dive and have a look. To any comparisons, what actually is the series for those that have never heard of it before? Well, the Soul Reaver is a continuation of the Legacy of Kain series. In the Soul Reaver titles, you play as Raziel, one of Kain's lieutenants, and it's basically the story of his seeming betrayal by Kain and him enacting revenge. And it had a unique twist for the time in that you were in a spectral realm, and you could morph between that and the real world. And in the spectral world, you can't interact with the physical world. There's monsters, like I'm showing on screen now, that you have to fight, but there's no you can't move blocks or solve any of the interaction puzzles. So focused a lot on sort of puzzles that force you to use your mind in thinking, well, I've got these powers that work in this world, or that don't work in the material world or spectral world. And then also changing between the two worlds also can morph the geometry of the area. So some bits that you couldn't reach before might move down or move up, or bend or twist as you change worlds. You'll see here when you find these portals that you step on and you can move them, and the fact that you can't do this any time adds to those puzzles, because the developers build a lot around this. And the game is very much an open, it was one of the first examples of a seemingly open world, and what they did was, it was quite a technical front for the time, because they streamed the whole world off the disc constantly. You had a loading screen initially when you started the game, and then it would just stream it off the disc, which was such a technical achievement, because when you think stuff like that happens, and it's got to hold the geometry for both versions of the world at the same time in memory. So it was quite a technical achievement for the time, and this remaster stays very focused to that. In terms of gameplay, like I said, you've got those puzzles are a large part of this. There is some combat. It's very of its time combat. There's not a huge amount to it. There are some fun bits in that you can, you've got some basic moves to attack the vampires in the world. You can pick up spears and torches and things like that, and once you've knocked them out, you have to then skewer them so that you can take the soul, because they'll just heal if you don't. So it has some nuances, but it's not, you're not here for the combat. That's not the main point of the game. I actually think these type of games, and the Shadow Mans and those type of games that came out at the time, they remind me very much of sort of an evolution of the Metroid series, where you'll pick, in this game for example, you'll fight with Raziel's vampire brothers, gain an ability off them, and that opens up another area of the map. And it's very much that sort of Metroid and Castlevania-esque, get a power, unlock more of the map, get a power, unlock more of the map. And one of the big things about the first Soul Reaver, it was unfinished. They had to release it, so there's bits and pieces in here that kind of you don't do a lot with, but they're just fun to find. You'll find glyphs that you absolutely do not need to finish the game, but they unlock powers. And the developers had all sorts of thoughts that they wanted to do in terms of elemental powers on your Reaver and all kinds of things that didn't appear until the second game in the series. The second game in the series is a much more linear affair and even more story focused, if that's even possible. So it is a series that, if you'd like your stories, this is Amy Hennig, who did the Uncharted series. The dialogue, story, writing, plot of this is brilliant, and it really flows well. It can be quite hard to follow, especially in the second one when the time travel element comes into it, but really worth playing. The only downside to that element of it is both games end on a cliffhanger, and you'd have to play Legacy of Kain Defiance to actually get the final story of Raziel's series. So bear that in mind, that you probably will end up wanting more out of this. In terms of actual gameplay, again, before we get on to comparisons, it is very much of its time, and modern gamers probably will be quite frustrated with some of the elements. There's a lot of block pushing puzzles and moving them early on, which I don't particularly mind, but some people might just the game's best with the puzzles when it incorporates that dual world mechanic and more interesting puzzles of that nature. When you're just moving block rounds into shapes, it can be a bit tedious. The other thing as well is the save system. While you can save at any point in time, when you load those saves back up, you always start back at the start with the Elder God, and there's gates that you find that allow you to teleport to certain areas of the map. So it's fairly quick to get back to where you were, but you don't start right where you saved, even though the save system seems like that's what you're doing. In that sense, the second game in the series is actually probably the more modern of the two, in terms of, I think gamers will get on with it a bit more. It's got a more traditional save system. You find somewhere, you save at that place, you restart at that place. There's less block puzzles. The puzzles that are in there are kind of within structures, so you'll find like a temple, you'll solve a bunch of puzzles in that temple to get a new power, you'll move on to a linear piece, go to the temple, blah blah blah, repeat. So it's more structured, and I think modern gamers will probably appreciate the second one more than the original, but I'd like that open world part of the first one. And in terms of these remasters, it seems to be the first one is where most of the attention is been placed. When you play the games like the Tomb Raider remasters, you can click a button and you can switch between supposedly the old graphics and the new graphics. As you can see here, there we go, I've changed it from the PS2 to the supposed PS2 original, and there's not that much difference in the PS2 one. When you're flicking back and forth, it's mainly a bit of geometry and nicer textures. But don't be fooled, this is a comparison of the new character models, the Dreamcast and the PS1 original. And when you flick back to PS1 mode in this, I'll show you here, it's a lot, it's a higher resolution, the textures are a lot, they've cleaned them up a bit, so it's not exact, it's how you remember the PS1 look, and it's not what the PS1 actually looked like. But it is a faithful way of playing it if you want that retro feeling there. And like I said, the original seems to have got the most time lavished on it. If I show you the opening intro here compared to the Dreamcast one, the veins on Raziel are much more clearer. In fact, it seems almost like a more robust model. I think it seems like they've fully done this original intro from scratch, because it doesn't look AI upscaled to me. It looks brand new, as if it's like real-time rendered in a new engine or something along those lines, rather than the old sort of CGI style one. And they've done a really phenomenal job on bringing that original up to scratch, really, on what modern gamers would expect. It's still, it's not the prettiest looking game, because they've been faithful to that original. They want that feeling of the original, and they've kept it really nicely. Still got the same draw distances and all that kind of stuff. It's just they've added analog controls and a few other bells and whistles just to bring it that level forward. But if you're itching for that retro experience, then it absolutely nails it. The other thing you get with this is quite a chunk of bonus content. So one of my favourites is you get lots of outtakes from the original recordings, so you can see the guys who sadly some aren't with us anymore, you can see their original recordings of it. You've got galleries, music player, lore videos, you've got Dark Chronicle, which is kind of like a script of the games, which is really nice. The other thing that is a big inclusion for those who are true diehard fans is this is the first time, I think, that they've included what they've called lost levels, which are they've pieced together some of the old unfinished bits of Soul Reaver 1, and you can now access them from a menu and go and explore them a bit. They've kind of finished them off in terms of making them explorable areas and not quite as broken, but you can interact with some bosses that were cut where bits of dialogue are in there that were obviously cut, but other bits weren't finished, so they're not in there. So they're just nice pieces to explore a bit of history of the game that wasn't there. So as a fan of the series, I really enjoyed some of that bonus content that they've added. It's a great little touch in there. So would I recommend you pick it up now? Well, absolutely. So the Soul Reaver games and the Legacy of Kain series in general, to be honest, is some of the best written games from that era. The dialogue, like I said before, the dialogue, the voices, voice acting, all top notch. Great story, loads of lore to dig your teeth into, really well thought out. So from that alone, I recommend it. The gameplay might be a bit too old school for some of the more modern mindsets, but I think it's still worth ploughing through that, even if you don't like it for the story. The only actual thing that I would have against this is I don't believe it's got a physical release yet. Now, I want them to keep this series going, so I did break my rule of buying digital in order to show support, in the hope that they might use this to keep the series going and maybe do a full remaster of some of the other games in the series, or even give this a physical release. Like the Tomb Raider ones, they came out digital first and then physical, so hopefully they do that with this, because I would love this to get a physical release for that, just that piece of gaming history kept for a while, especially with that bonus content section. But what do you guys all think? Have you played it? Did you play the originals? Are you looking forward to this? I'd love to hear from you. As always, I'm Retro48K, and I'll see you next time.